Welcome back, plant people. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Shane, and today we are going to talk about what it takes to make your own houseplant potting mix. Actually, it's super easy. I don't know why everyone acts like it's such a big deal to make this crazy composition for houseplants. It's not. It is very basic. You need 4 things, 5 things if you're feeling froggy. So let's just get right into it. So to start off, basically, if you go to the store and buy your own houseplant potting mix, it's not incorrect, but if you are anything like me, you have purchased Miracle-Gro potting mix or whatever it may be, and your plants have died because they have been completely suffocated by this compact mud that they put in a bag. There might be the tiniest bit of perlite in there, but for the most part it is just like mud in a bag. So when you're first starting off, of course you're just going to buy a houseplant potting mix and hope that it works, but as you learn your plants and learn your environment, learn your watering schedule and what works for you, you will realize that there are a few amendments that you can make to this soil that will make the biggest improvement for your houseplants. So most houseplant potting mixes contain some of the same basic things. You're going to have sphagnum peat moss in there, you're going to have perlite, you may have some worm castings, and sometimes if you're lucky you might have orchid bark in there or something along those lines. Those are all that you need to make a bomb houseplant mix that you can change for the seasons, you can change for your plants, depending on what you're realizing they like and don't like, all of that. Super easy. So we're going to go ahead and go over what each of these contents in the houseplant potting mix, what they do, what their purpose is, and then I'm gonna go ahead and show you my ratios. So to start off with the first one, sphagnum peat moss. Not the same thing as straight up sphagnum moss. Sphagnum peat moss is actually the decomposed materials found in peat bogs. It's decomposed sphagnum moss with a handful of other random organic things, but they are found in peat bogs. So if you see sphagnum moss looks more like little caterpillars, peat moss is basically like a broken down version of that. And so what does peat moss do in houseplant soil? That's actually the largest percentage of what is in your houseplant potting mix when you buy it just pre-done in a bag. It basically is there to help retain moisture. It is there also to help retain nutrients for when you're watering, so that all of your nutrients that you put in don't just drain right out as soon as you put it in. So that is sphagnum peat moss. The second item that I put in my houseplant potting mix is perlite. Perlite is actually apparently like volcanic glass or something about when water comes in contact with obsidian. I don't know, it's over my head. But basically it's like puffed volcanic glass, more or less. And it actually has a high water content, but it also holds on to oxygen as well. So it helps keep your soil aerated, but also helps with some water and aeration down by the roots as well. So it's like the opposite of sphagnum, but does something similar to sphagnum. They work synergistically, if you know what I'm saying. Most importantly, we do put perlite in our soil to help make sure that it drains off any extra water, so that the water is not just hanging out in the middle of your plant. It's gonna help all of that extra dump go right through, whatever that means. Next up, we have got orchid bark, which orchid bark is pretty much what it sounds like. It's like tree bark. They use specific ones depending on which brand you buy, but it can come in smaller chunks, it can come in larger chunks, but basically it's called orchid bark because it's usually used for orchids, which are epiphytes, meaning that they grow on other plants, and basically they are watered by rainwater, like running through their roots. So basically they don't like to get saturated or anything like that. They are very well draining. So adding orchid bark into a soil mix also helps it be very well draining. Generally, I have aroids. Soil mix is gonna mostly cover aroids. Typically, aroids can be hemiepiphytic, meaning that they can start as understory plants. They can start as like a terrestrial growth, and then they can find a tree or whatever it may be and then grow up and become epiphytic. So they are kind of like multifaceted in that way, that they like to be well draining, but they also do need to hold a little bit more moisture than your epiphytes like your orchids and things like that. So orchid bark is going to help maintain that drainage as if it was in its own environment. Finally, we have got worm castings, which is worm poop. Yes, indeed. But it is the best thing ever for your plants. I love worm castings because it is a natural fertilizer. But in addition to that, if you actually feel worm castings just by themselves, it already feels like it has some moisture to it. So it does help in maintaining kind of a balanced level of moisture in your soil mix. I don't believe it is straight up worm castings what you're going to have. If you did get worm castings, I don't know how many worms that would be that would have had to poop, and how did they manage to just get worm poop? Who was collecting all of this worm poop? So anyways, worm castings are there for nutrients. They're actually a natural fertilizer. You wouldn't even necessarily need to fertilize if you use worm castings. I still do, but you don't necessarily have to. So worm castings, in addition to the other 3 items, make up my entire soil mixture. In addition to all of that, I do occasionally put in horticultural charcoal. The last round of soil mixture that I did, I put in horticultural charcoal, and that is something that you will typically see when people do terrariums and things like that. They do a layer. It helps to filter out impurities in your soil. I can't say 100% whether or not it was effective. It certainly hasn't hurt anything. The measurements for my soil mixture, equal parts all the way through. I dump it into a Cheeto container, shake it up, and then just add on more layers as I go. Another layer of sphagnum, another layer of perlite, etc., until I fill up my container. And that's all that it takes.